Hi everyone, it's Marc from Tranquil Garden Urban Homestead. Today in my video I'm going to show you how to make this salad container garden. A very easy project, really would take you maybe at most 15 minutes to do once you have everything together that you need. And this is a great way to get started with gardening, growing a few vegetables. You can do this on a balcony, you can do this on a deck or a patio if you don't have a backyard or you can't use your backyard, if you're renting, for instance, a suite in a house. And it's very convenient. You can go ahead and you can pick some lettuce, you can pick some cherry tomatoes when they're ripe, and you can make yourself your own salad, or you can make yourself a sandwich, or whatever you feel like eating together. You can actually easily have homegrown food without much effort, without using up much space, and also the important thing is not needing much time to do it in. So stay tuned to watch how I actually create one of these salad container gardens in just a few short minutes. Have a look first to see what we need, and it's usually helpful to prepare your things ahead of time so you're not rushing back and forth trying to get everything together. So what we've got here is we've got 3 lettuce plants that I happen to grow from seed, but you can buy just as well from the nursery. And then we've got a couple of tomato plants. These are Sweet Million cherry tomatoes, and we're only going to use 1. There happen to be 2 in the container, in the pot, but we'll just use 1 for this salad container garden. And then the other thing is we've got some coffee filters, and you'll see in a sec what we do with those. We have some nice compost. We have our container, and it looks a little bit big, but it's actually a good size to grow a tomato plant well. So it gets nice and big and provides you with lots of juicy cherry tomatoes. And then we've got some pine bark mulch, which I bought in bulk, but you can just as well buy a small bag at the garden center. And then we've got a watering can to water everything. We've got some ties, Velcro ties, and also just some regular green yarn. And finally, we also have a long stake that we can use to stake up the tomato plant so it doesn't flop over. So those are all the things that we need. It's not much. It's easy to get either at a garden center or coffee filters, obviously, you can get at the grocery store. So nothing to be intimidated about. So let's get started and get our soil into the container, and then we'll start planting. Alright, so the first step is we're going to put some soil in our container. It's been washed. I'm not quite sure exactly the size of the container. It's probably about 12 inches across. That's what it looks like. You can go with a smaller container, but keep in mind that your tomato plant probably won't get that big if you don't have enough room for the roots. The lettuce plants won't matter. They can actually grow in very shallow containers, so if you're just growing lettuce, you could go ahead and just get a fairly shallow container and it will still work out for you. But with the tomato plant, it's better to go deep. I would say try to aim for 12 inches deep. Keep in mind that once this is full of soil, it's going to be very heavy, especially after you water it, so you may want to actually put this in place where it's going to be, fill it up there, do the planting, and then that way you don't have to move it. I'm going to end up moving it, so I'll have to be careful that I don't strain my back. But if you're worried about that, or you don't have the help that you need to do it, then place it where you want it and leave it there and then fill it up there, and then you don't need to move it. So I mentioned coffee filters, and these coffee filters are useful for one purpose, and that is to actually close up these holes. Like you can probably see, there's some holes in here. I can stick my finger in there and you'll see my finger down at the bottom. So we want to close those holes up just so that the soil doesn't fall out and make a mess. So what we'll do is we'll take these and we'll actually place them inside. Let's see if we can show it to you properly. How about on the side here? There we go. Can you see it now? Alright, so we're going to just basically put them along the holes, and what I usually do is I will put one there, I'll throw in a bunch of soil on top of it just to hold it in place, and then I'll do the other ones. So there's 4 of them in total, so I'll need 4 coffee filters. And then once they're in place, then we can go ahead and fill more soil in. What you might find too is if you wet the coffee filters, they'll tend to stay in place and actually stick to the plastic, and then that way they don't move around on you. So we'll do that quickly. So we'll need 4 of them. And what I'm doing is I'm simply actually folding them in half. You don't have to use this particular type of coffee filter. You could use the other type, but I just happen to have these as spares. Someone had bought them, didn't use them, and gave them to me, so I'll just put them in here. And like I said, they're mainly just to make sure that your soil doesn't fall out of the holes. Some pots have very small holes, and so you'll find that you won't need to do this, but with this one, definitely the holes are pretty big. So then the other thing that we've got here is we've got our compost just off camera here, and I'm just going to use my hands to pop it in. If you're squeamish, wear gloves. You can use a trowel as well. You don't need to do it with your hands, but you know, I'm just used to getting my hands dirty, I guess, and it's easier in some ways. You don't need to clean something else. So we'll take some of the compost, and like I said, I usually try to place it in so that it's holding the coffee filters in place, and then I just keep dumping more and more. So I'll do that, and I won't bore you by having to watch me for a minute or so, and then we'll come back and we'll actually start planting. Alright, so we've got the soil filled up in the container. You'll notice though that I didn't fill it all the way up, so there's about maybe an inch or about 2.5 centimeters or so of space above the soil. And the reason why we want to do that is twofold. One is once we've got everything planted up, we want to put a little bit of mulch on top to keep the moisture in, to keep weeds from germinating, and just in general sort of clean up the pot, make it look nice. And we also want to leave a little bit of room so that when you water it, the water can kind of sink in and it won't run off over the top, so that you'll always make sure that your pot is well watered. So what we'll do is we've got a nice surface here. The compost that I use is actually homemade compost, but you could of course also simply buy a bag of compost at the garden center or even grocery store or wherever you happen to be when you're running your errands. So what we'll do first is we'll grab our tomato, our sweet million cherry tomato, and because I have 2 in here, I'm going to be very carefully try to extract 1. And the easiest way to do it is to simply invert the pot, make sure to support the stems with your fingers, and then give it a little bit of a tap, and out it comes. I'm going to have to tease out this 1 plant and actually divide it. But if you only have the 1 plant when you buy it from the nursery, this is a lot easier. In fact, you don't have to do anything here. All you need to really do is pop it in the hole. So I'm going to take the plant that is left over and just pop it back in the pot. And I'll be planting that somewhere else once I decide where I'm going to put it. Always good to have lots of cherry tomatoes, especially when you have kids, because kids love cherry tomatoes. They love being able to put them in their mouth and they pop, and they're sweet, and they just love cherry tomatoes. I know my daughter does. So when you've got your plant here, you want to plant it in, and it's a matter of just making a hole in the middle, and as close to the middle as you can. And then what we want to do is actually plant it as deep as we can and just leave sort of that top truss of leaves that you see here visible. The good thing about doing that is the tomato plant will actually start putting out roots along the stem here, what is buried, and that'll help to stabilize the plant, but also it's easier for the plant to actually take up nutrients. So we'll pop it in the hole, and you can see that I am leaving it fairly deep, and then just pile the soil back in, give it a good tamp down. And it's actually a good idea to kind of leave a little bit of a dish so that when you do water it, the water will stay in the middle. The lettuce that you put around the edges will need water too, but if you're only planting a tomato plant, it's a good idea to dish it, and then that way the water will stay there and will sink right down the middle into the roots better. So then we're going to do something similar with our lettuce plants. These were grown by me from seed, but if you're buying them from the nursery in a pot, you'll probably get them somewhat like this. And again, you want to just tap them out. And these are being grown in a soilless mix, so they're pretty easy to get out. And then what you want to do is try, I'm planting 3 of them. You want to sort of space them out evenly around the edges. And we want to sort of put them halfway between the tomato plant and the edge of the pot. And here what you want to do is try to get them as deep as the stem is, where you get the first leaves coming out, so that again they're well rooted down. So put them in like that. Alright, hopefully you can see that well. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll plant the rest of the lettuce plants around the perimeter, trying to evenly space them. Don't worry too much. Gardening doesn't have to be exact. If you're off by a few centimeters, no one's going to really care. So, but we don't want to plant them too close together, otherwise the lettuce plants won't have much room to grow. So we'll pop this one in, grab the third one. That's the second one. This one is a little bit smaller, that's okay. We'll just plop it in here. And because it's a little bit thinner, I'm actually going to bury it a little bit deeper too. And again, you want to firm around them so that they're well rooted into the soil. Don't worry about them being floppy right now. They need a good drink of water, so once they've got a drink of water, they'll be fine. If you find any leaves that are like yellow or kind of pale color, you can just chop them off and toss them. So then the next step, and almost the last step, we're not quite done yet, is to put in a stake. And I've just got a piece of wood basically here. You can also buy stakes. There's some plastic coated kind of metal stakes, and so that they're plastic coated so they don't rust. Or you can just grab a piece of wood that you happen to have around the house, even like an old broom handle would work. Just anything that'll help support the tomato as it grows, because they do have a tendency to flop over. So I hope I have enough room here in the greenhouse. I've got a roof overhead anyways. So we'll pop this in as close as possible to the plant, and then that basically will give the tomato plant some place to kind of be guided up as it grows. And that's why you have either some string, some yarn, you can use jute twine, just whatever you have, even butcher's twine that you use like in the kitchen. Doesn't have to be anything. You can even use like old shoelaces, whatever you have, wire ties from like bread. And or the other thing you can do is at the garden center you can also get these Velcro ones, which basically you can just put around the post and then tie your tomato plant to. You always want to make sure that when you tie the tomato plant that it isn't too tight. Otherwise the tomato plant, the stem can actually get constricted and it'll die. So now that we've got everything planted up, the final step before we water things in is to give it a good layer of mulch. And the mulch, as I mentioned, just helps to conserve moisture, it keeps weeds from growing, and also looks better. So what I have here is I have some pine bark mulch that I bought in bulk to use in the rest of the garden. And this one you can buy in just really small bags just for your pots if you'd like. Get the fine one. You can get some really coarse ground one, but this is a fine one, so this one will actually not look out of scale in your pots. So what we'll do is we'll just basically pile it in, and we don't want to bury our plants too deep, but just basically this will guarantee that things will stay moist longer, and hopefully you won't get pesky weeds growing up. It's always a good idea to use compost that is weed seed free, but when I'm using my own compost, sometimes I do have the occasional weed seed in there, and so we'll just pop that in there. And as this grows, what I'll do is I'll do another video on how to sort of maintain it and how to keep it going, how to prune the tomato plant, because that sometimes helps to keep it going. But all of this stuff is fairly simple. And this normally would have taken me less than 15 minutes. It took me a little longer because I was doing camera setup and obviously getting my supplies together so I'd be prepared for the video. But if you're not doing a video, then this really should take you maybe 15 minutes at most. Something you can do very easily, like, you know, around lunchtime on the weekend when you have the extra 15 minutes, or maybe just before dinner on the week, during the week, or just after dinner during the week, or even in the morning. If you're a early riser like me, you can go out into the garden and maybe plant one of these up in about 15 minutes just before you head to work. So once we've got it all done, and in case you notice anything is too deep, you can always very gently pull it up a little bit. But over time, as you water it, you'll notice the mulch will go down a bit. And then the final step is grab yourself a watering can, or if you don't have a watering can, then just like a cup from the kitchen, or an old yogurt container that's well washed, or whatever, just to make it easy to water. I've got a nice little watering can that I use for a lot of my pots, and we just want to water in really well. Keep in mind that if you're going to be moving this pot somewhere else, you may want to hold off watering, because the moment that you watered and the soil is heavy, it's going to be harder to move it. So I'm not going to water it too much, because I do have to move it off this bench out of the greenhouse into its final spot where it's going to grow. But essentially, we're just going to water every plant in a little bit. And I've actually got some kind of a flying insect here on my hand right now that's taken residence in my greenhouse, so we have another star on the video, so to speak. So anyways, we're done, basically. The important thing is keep it well watered. Don't let it dry out. If it's really dry, really hot, you will have to do it at least once a day. Another advantage of using a bigger pot is that you don't need to water as much. If you use a small pot, you will definitely have to water it. You may have to water it once in the morning before you go to work, and then once in the evening when you come home from work. So keep that in mind if you're busy, that a bigger pot actually will save you a bit of time too in watering. And what we'll do is we'll look at this maybe in a week or two, see how it's doing, and I'll give you some tips on how to fertilize, how to keep up with the watering, and what to do to keep the tomato plant pruned, and then also to make sure we tie it up on the stake to keep it from flopping over. And then basically we're just waiting for time to start harvesting. The lettuce we'll be able to harvest first, but we'll be able to actually harvest it over a period of time. And hopefully by the time the tomatoes start to come on, we'll still have some lettuce left to have a nice salad for lunch or for dinner, something that you can take with you easily to work. So that's it, and so I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. It's been useful for you. You're inspired to start one today, if not next week or tomorrow. And if you would like to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe, make sure to like the video. I'd really appreciate that. And until next time, take care and happy growing.